The wind howled across the Montana Territory as blood bloomed on Cooper Prescott's shirt, the bullet from a cattle rustler's gun having grazed his side during a tense standoff. That was the moment he decided he'd had enough of driving herds for other men. At 32, he'd earn his own piece of heaven or die trying. Montana Territory. 1877, the relentless summer sun beat down on Cooper as he drove the final fence post into the hard, packed earth. 6 months of backbreaking work had transformed the wild stretch of land he'd purchased into something resembling a proper ranch. The small cabin stood weathered but solid against the backdrop of mountains. The corral housed 8 horses he'd broken himself, and a modest herd of cattle grazed on the eastern pasture. Cooper wiped sweat from his brow and surveyed his kingdom. 200 acres of rolling grassland, pine forests, and a creek that never ran dry even in August. It wasn't much compared to some of the cattle barons' spreads, but it was his. Paid for with 12 years of saved wages, sore muscles, and a stubborn refusal to die when circumstances suggested otherwise. "What do you think, Ranger?" he asked the chestnut gelding grazing nearby. The horse flicked an ear in his direction but continued methodically tearing at the grass. "Not much for conversation today, I see." Cooper chuckled to himself, gathering his tools. The solitude suited him fine most days, though there were moments when the vastness of the land made him feel like the last man on earth. The nearest settlement, Whitetail Creek, was a half-day's ride south, close enough for supplies but far enough to avoid unwanted company. He loaded his tools into the saddlebag, wincing as the movement pulled at the scar on his side. The wound had healed, but the memory remained fresh. 3 cattle rustlers had tried to take a herd he was driving for the Bar T Ranch. He'd put 2 in the ground, and the third had fled with a bullet in his shoulder, but not before leaving Cooper with a parting gift that nearly sent him to meet his maker. That night, delirious with fever in a trail camp, Cooper had made a promise to himself: no more risking his neck for another man's profit. He'd stake his own claim, build something lasting, something that would be remembered after he was gone. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, hinting at the coming autumn. Cooper had plans to ride into Whitetail Creek for supplies before winter set in. The mountains would be impassable once the heavy snows came, and he'd need enough provisions to last until spring. He saddled Ranger at first light, checked his Colt revolver, and tucked a Winchester rifle into the saddle scabbard. The Montana Territory was growing more civilized by the day, but a man still needed to be prepared. Indians were mostly on reservations now, but desperate outlaws and hungry predators, both the 4-legged and 2-legged variety, were constant threats. The trail to town took him through stands of pine and aspen, the latter beginning to turn gold with the changing season. Cooper breathed deeply, savoring the crisp air. This land spoke to something primal in him, something that had never found satisfaction in the crowded streets of St. Louis where he'd spent his youth. He was halfway to town when Ranger suddenly tensed, ears pricked forward toward something in the distance. Cooper instinctively moved his hand to his revolver, scanning the trail ahead. That's when he heard a woman's voice, barely audible, calling for help. Cooper urged Ranger forward, following the sound off the main trail and into a grove of aspens. What he found made him draw rein sharply. A small, covered wagon lay tilted awkwardly, one wheel completely shattered. Beside it sat a young woman, perhaps 25, her dress dirty and torn at the hem. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, cascading down her back. But what caught Cooper's attention most was the prominent swell of her belly beneath her dress. She was with child, and from the size of her, not far from her time. "Madam," Cooper called, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. "You all right?" She looked up, startled, then visibly relieved to see another human being. "Oh, thank God, I've been stranded since yesterday afternoon." Cooper dismounted, approaching slowly. "Cooper Prescott, madam, I ranch north of here." "Rachel Collins," she replied, attempting to stand but struggling with her burden. Cooper quickly moved to help her. "Careful now. How long have you been out here alone?" "Since yesterday." "The wheel broke and I couldn't fix it. I was hoping someone would come along." Her voice trembled slightly. "I didn't expect to be traveling alone, but—" Cooper nodded, not pressing. The story of a pregnant woman traveling unaccompanied through the territory was bound to be complicated. "Where were you headed?" Rachel's eyes dropped. "Nowhere in particular, just away." Cooper recognized the look of someone running from something or someone. He'd seen it often enough in his trail days. Men fleeing the law, women escaping bad situations, families seeking a fresh start. "When's your baby due?" he asked, gesturing toward her middle. "About a month, I think." She placed a protective hand over her belly. "That's why I needed to leave when I did." Cooper looked from the broken wagon to the woman's exhausted face. Whitetail Creek was still a few hours' ride away, and she was in no condition to walk that far. The wagon was beyond roadside repair. "You got family in these parts?" Rachel shook her head, something like shame crossing her features. "No, I don't know anyone here. I was just passing through." Cooper considered his options. The decent thing would be to take her to town, but he knew how small settlements treated unmarried women in her condition. The local hotel might not even give her a room. "Miss Collins, I've got a ranch about 3 hours' ride north of here. It's not much, but there's a roof and walls. You're welcome to rest there until we figure out what to do about your wagon and your situation." She studied his face, clearly weighing her limited options. "Why would you help a stranger like this, Mr. Prescott?" Cooper shrugged. "Out here, refusing help to someone in need is as good as a death sentence. I'd do the same for anyone." After a moment's hesitation, Rachel nodded. "Thank you, I accept your offer." Cooper helped her salvage her belongings from the wagon: a small trunk of clothes, some cooking utensils, a worn Bible, and a pouch that clinked with what he assumed were her savings. He secured everything to Ranger, then offered Rachel his hand. "You'll have to ride with me." Ranger's strong enough for two. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her, careful to give her as much space as possible on the saddle. It was awkward but manageable. Ranger snorted his disapproval at the extra weight but didn't balk. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic movement of the horse the only sound between them. Cooper was acutely aware of the impropriety of their arrangement: an unmarried man and woman traveling alone, her condition obvious to anyone they might encounter. But wilderness had its own rules of propriety, where survival took precedence over social niceties. "May I ask why you were traveling alone?" he finally ventured. "It's dangerous country for anyone, let alone a woman in your condition." Rachel tensed against him. "It was more dangerous to stay," she said softly. Cooper didn't press. Whatever had driven her to flee while heavy with child must have been dire indeed. "The father?" he asked simply. "Dead," she replied, her tone flat. "Or so I was told." Something in her voice suggested there was more to that story, but Cooper recognized the boundaries of privacy. Out west, a person's past was their own business unless they chose to share it. "I'm sorry for your loss," he offered. Rachel said nothing for several long moments. "Are you married, Mr. Prescott?" "Cooper, please. And no, never found the time or the right woman. Been driving cattle since I was 20. Only just settled on my own place this spring." "It must be peaceful having your own land." Cooper smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Peaceful isn't the word I'd use. There's always work to be done, but there's satisfaction in it." They continued northward, the sun climbing higher. Cooper pointed out landmarks: the distant mountain range that marked the edge of his property, the creek that wound through the valley like a silver ribbon. "It's beautiful country," Rachel murmured. "That it is, harsh at times but honest. The land doesn't lie to you or promise more than it can give." By mid-afternoon, they crested the final hill that overlooked Cooper's ranch. From this vantage point, the cabin looked smaller, the corral more makeshift than he'd like to admit. But smoke curled from the chimney, his morning fire still smoldering, and the cattle dotted the far pasture like dark smudges against the green. "There it is," he said. "Prescott Ranch. Not much to look at yet, but it's home." Rachel said nothing, but he felt her relax slightly against him. As they approached the cabin, Cooper felt a sudden self-consciousness about the sparse accommodations. He'd built the place for function, not comfort, with a single room serving as kitchen, dining area, and sleeping quarters. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said as he helped her down from the horse. "You can have the cabin." Rachel looked at him sharply. "I won't put you out of your own home." "It's no trouble. I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count. The barn's a luxury by comparison. Before she could protest further, Cooper carried her trunk into the cabin and set it near the rough-hewn table that dominated one wall. A narrow bed occupied the opposite corner with a small cookstove between. A single window let in the afternoon light, illuminating the simple, functional space. "It's not much," he said apologetically. Rachel ran her hand along the table's edge, taking in the sparse furnishings. "It's more than I had yesterday," she said softly. "Thank you." Cooper cleared his throat, suddenly unsure of the proper protocol for having a pregnant woman as an unexpected guest. "Are you hungry? I've got some venison stew left from yesterday. Could heat it up." Rachel nodded gratefully. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Anything would be welcome." While Cooper busied himself at the stove, Rachel eased herself onto one of the two chairs at the table, sighing as she took the weight off her feet. "How long have you been traveling?" Cooper asked, stirring the pot of stew. 2 weeks, give or take. Started from Denver." Cooper whistled low. "That's a hard journey for anyone, let alone a woman in my condition," Rachel finished with a wry smile. "Yes, well, necessity doesn't always wait for convenient circumstances." Cooper served the stew in wooden bowls, placing one before Rachel along with a hunk of bread slightly stale but still edible. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the gravity of their unusual situation settling over them. "I appreciate your kindness," Rachel finally said. "But I don't want to impose. Once I've rested, I should continue on." Cooper looked up from his food. "Continue on to where, exactly?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Rachel stared into her bowl. "Miss Collins," Cooper said gently, "I don't mean to pry into your affairs, but it seems to me you might be better served staying put until after your baby comes. Traveling in your condition isn't safe, and winter will be here before long. The passes get snowed in, sometimes till April." Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she set down her spoon. "I can't stay here, it wouldn't be proper." Cooper leaned back in his chair. "Proper went out the window the moment you set out alone across the territory. Out here, survival trumps propriety every time. What would people say? A single woman living on the property of an unmarried man. Nearest neighbor is 10 miles away, and they mind their own business. Folks in town hardly know I exist except when I come in for supplies." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, the first sign of vulnerability she'd shown. "You don't understand. I've already been cast out once for this child. I can't," she broke off, pressing her lips together. Cooper waited, giving her space to continue if she chose. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "My family in Denver, they're respected people. When I told them about the baby, my father gave me 2 choices: marry immediately or leave and never return." A bitter laugh escaped her. "The problem was, the man responsible had already left town. My father didn't believe me when I said he'd promised marriage." Cooper nodded slowly. "It was an old story, played out countless times across the frontier. And now I have nothing. Nowhere to go, no name to give my child." Her hands cradled her belly protectively. "All I have are the few possessions in that trunk and whatever future I can make." Cooper considered her words, turning them over in his mind. He'd never been one for impulsive decisions. His careful saving and planning for his own ranch proved that, but sometimes circumstances demanded quick judgments. "You'll raise that baby on my land," he said simply. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "What? You need a safe place. I have one. This cabin has stood empty for years before I claimed it. Probably housed a family at some point." He gestured around the room. "It's not much, but it's solid. There's good water from the creek, game in the woods. Worst comes to worst, you stay through winter and move on in spring." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Cooper sighed, running a hand through his hair. "When I was 16, my mother found herself alone with 4 children after my father was killed in a mill accident. Nobody offered help. We lost everything: our home, our dignity. I swore if I ever had the means, I'd never turn away someone who needed shelter." Rachel studied his face, searching for hidden motives. "Most men would want something in return." "I'm not most men," Cooper replied evenly. "All I ask is that you help with what chores you can manage. Once the baby comes, we'll figure out the rest." For a long moment, Rachel said nothing, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. Through winter, then, I'll earn my keep as best I can. That's settled, then, Cooper said, rising from the table. I'll fetch more of your things from outside and get settled in the barn. You should rest. As he turned to leave, Rachel called after him. Mr. Prescott, Cooper, thank you. Not many would do what you're doing. Cooper paused at the door. Maybe not, but they should. The following days established a tentative routine between them. Cooper rose before dawn to tend the livestock, hunt, or mend fences, while Rachel kept the cabin and prepared meals. Despite her condition, she insisted on contributing gathering eggs from the small chicken coop Cooper had built, tending a late vegetable garden, and even helping to preserve meat for the coming winter. They maintained a respectful distance, Cooper sleeping in the barn as promised and giving Rachel privacy whenever possible. Their conversations over meals gradually evolved from awkward politeness to genuine interest, as two solitary souls discovered the unexpected comfort of companionship. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Cooper asked one evening, savoring a rabbit stew seasoned with wild herbs Rachel had gathered. "My mother," she replied, a soft smile playing at her lips. She believed a proper lady should know how to run a household, regardless of whether she might someday have servants to do it for her. "She taught you well. She would be scandalized to see me now." Rachel's smile turned sad. Living unchaperoned on a bachelor's ranch, heavy with a child out of wedlock. "Sometimes the proper path isn't the right one," Cooper observed, breaking off a piece of cornbread. "I imagine your mother wanted you alive and well above all else." Rachel fell silent, absently stroking her rounded belly. The baby was active tonight, shifting visibly beneath her dress. "May I?" Cooper asked hesitantly, gesturing toward her middle. Surprise flickered across Rachel's face, followed by a tentative nod. Cooper reached across the table, placing his weathered hand gently on the swell of her belly. Almost immediately, he felt a decisive kick against his palm. "Strong," he commented, a smile creasing his face. "Going to be a handful." "Like his father," Rachel murmured, then flushed as if she hadn't meant to speak the words aloud. Cooper withdrew his hand but didn't push for elaboration. Instead, he said, "My brother has 4 children up in Montana. Says the trick is to always let them think you're one step ahead, even when you're not." Rachel laughed, the sound brightening the cabin. "Your brother sounds wise. Wiser than me in some ways. He settled down early, built a life with someone. I was always chasing the next herd, the next job." "And now," Cooper considered the question, "now I'm building something that might last, something more than just a season's wages or another man's fortune." Their eyes met across the table, holding for a moment longer than necessary before both looked away. As September gave way to October, the air grew sharper, the nights colder. Cooper spent long days cutting and stacking firewood, ensuring they'd have enough to last the winter. He hunted relentlessly, smoking and preserving meat, while Rachel put up preserves from the last of the garden's yield. One crisp morning, Cooper returned from checking his trapline to find Rachel outside the cabin, hanging laundry despite the chill. Her breath formed small clouds in the air, and her cheeks were flushed with cold. "You shouldn't be out in this weather," he chided gently, taking the wet sheet from her hands. "Not in your condition," Rachel frowned. "I'm pregnant, not invalid. Besides, these need to dry before the next storm." Cooper glanced at the western sky where dark clouds were gathering over the mountains. "Storms coming sooner than that. These won't dry in time." "Then what do you suggest?" "We'll hang them inside. I'll rig a line near the stove." Rachel reluctantly gathered the remaining wet clothes, wincing suddenly as she straightened. Cooper was at her side immediately. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said, one hand pressed to her lower back. "Just an ache. I've been having them for days." Cooper's brow furrowed with concern. "How many days?" 3 or 4. "It's normal, I think. My sister-in-law said her back ached terribly before her time came." "And how long before?" Rachel hesitated. "A week or so, as I recall." Cooper took the laundry basket from her hands. "Inside now, and I want you to rest." "Cooper, really? I'm fine, humor me," he said firmly. "I know nothing about birthing babies, and the nearest midwife is in town, half a day's ride away. If that baby's coming soon, we need to be prepared." Rachel allowed him to guide her inside, though she protested being treated like porcelain. Nevertheless, she settled into the rocking chair Cooper had recently traded a side of beef for, specifically with her comfort in mind. As he hung the laundry on a hastily strung line near the stove, Cooper mentally calculated the time it would take to ride to town and back with the midwife. If a storm hit, the journey could take twice as long or become impossible altogether. "We should consider sending for the midwife," he suggested, trying to keep his voice casual. "Before the weather turns." Rachel looked up from her mending. "I still have weeks yet. The baby isn't due until November." "Babies don't always keep to schedules," Cooper replied. "And winter comes early up here. Better safe than sorry." Before Rachel could respond, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. Cooper's hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip as he crossed to the entrance. Opening the door revealed a middle-aged man on horseback, another mount tethered behind him. Cooper recognized him as Tom Wilson, one of the ranchers from the valley south of his property. "Prescott," the man greeted him with a nod. "Sorry to trouble you, but I'm looking for my daughter. Word in town is you might have seen her." Cooper felt Rachel go still behind him, though she remained out of sight from the doorway. "Your daughter," he repeated carefully. "Rachel Collins," Wilson confirmed, his expression grim. "My ranch foreman saw her wagon abandoned on the trail weeks back, but there was no sign of her. Been searching ever since." Cooper maintained a neutral expression, acutely aware of Rachel's presence just feet away. "Collins, you said? Don't believe I've encountered anyone by that name." Wilson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Strange. Trapper who comes through town swore he saw a woman matching her description heading this way, said she looked to be in a family way." "Lot of folks pass through these parts," Cooper said evenly. "Can't say I've seen your daughter, though." "Sorry I can't be more help." Wilson studied Cooper's face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "If you do see her, tell her family's looking, her condition. It ain't what we thought. The man responsible has shown up in Denver looking to make things right." Cooper felt rather than saw Rachel move behind him, edging closer to the door. "I'll keep an eye out," Cooper promised. "Though with winter coming, not many travelers this way now." Wilson seemed about to leave when his gaze shifted beyond Cooper into the cabin. His eyes widened slightly at something he saw within. "That's a mighty small cabin for a man living alone," he observed, "and I don't recall you being one for fancy embroidered pillows." Cooper silently cursed himself for not noticing the feminine touches Rachel had added to the cabin over the past weeks. Before he could formulate a response, Rachel stepped into view beside him. "Hello, Father," she said quietly. Wilson's face registered shock, then relief, followed quickly by anger. "Rachel, you've had us worried sick. Your mother's beside herself." "I find that hard to believe," Rachel replied, her voice steady despite the slight tremor Cooper could feel where her shoulder brushed his. "Considering how quickly you cast me out." "That was a misunderstanding," Wilson insisted. "Caldwell returned to Denver last week asking after you, says he means to honor his promise." Rachel's laugh held no humor. "How convenient, and if I don't wish to marry him now." Wilson's expression hardened. "That child needs a name, Rachel, unless—" His gaze darted between her and Cooper. "Have you married since leaving Denver?" "No," Rachel answered firmly. "Mr. Prescott has kindly offered me shelter until after the baby comes, nothing more." Wilson's face darkened. "So you've ruined your reputation completely, living unchaperoned with a stranger while carrying another man's child." Cooper stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Rachel. "Mr. Wilson, your daughter has been treated with nothing but respect under my roof. I sleep in the barn and provide for her needs out of basic human decency, not any improper arrangement." "Decent men don't harbor young women without their family's knowledge," Wilson retorted. "Rachel, gather your things. You're coming home where you belong." Rachel's hand found Cooper's arm, gripping it tightly. "I'm not going anywhere, certainly not back to a family that abandoned me at the first sign of trouble." "You're being unreasonable. The lady has made her choice," Cooper interrupted, his voice taking on an edge of steel. "I suggest you respect it." Wilson's hand moved toward his gun belt, but Cooper was faster, his revolver appearing as if by magic. "I wouldn't," Cooper advised quietly. "I've no desire to harm my neighbor, but I will protect anyone under my care." For a tense moment, the only sound was the wind picking up outside, carrying the first snowflakes of the approaching storm. Finally, Wilson lowered his hand. "This isn't over," he warned. "I'll be back with the sheriff if necessary." "That's your right," Cooper acknowledged. "But the lady stays of her own free will. Any court would recognize that." Wilson turned his attention to his daughter. "Rachel, be reasonable. Winter's coming. This is no place for you to have a child. Come home where there are proper facilities, women who know what to do." For a moment, Cooper felt Rachel waver beside him. He wouldn't blame her if she chose the comfort and safety of her family home over his sparse cabin and limited knowledge of childbirth. "The man who did this," she finally said. "Robert Caldwell. He told me he loved me, then disappeared the moment I told him about the baby. Why would I trust him now? He claims he went to stake a mining claim to provide for you both," Wilson explained. "Says he sent letters that must have gone astray." Rachel shook her head. "Convenient excuses." "No, father, I've found peace here. I'll have my child on my own terms." Wilson's jaw clenched, but he recognized defeat for now. "The offer stands. When you come to your senses, you know where to find us." He touched the brim of his hat. "Madam Prescott." They watched in silence as he mounted and rode away, the snow beginning to fall in earnest around him. Only when he had disappeared from sight did Rachel release Cooper's arm, her fingers having left white impressions in his skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not telling him I was here. For giving me the choice." Cooper turned to face her, studying her pale features. "Was I wrong? Would you be safer with your family?" Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Safer, perhaps, but not happier, not free to make my own decisions. And Caldwell, if what your father says is true, then he can prove it by respecting my wishes now," she said firmly. "I need time, Cooper. Time to decide what's best for me and my child without being forced into a marriage I'm no longer certain I want." Cooper nodded slowly. "Then you'll stay, if you'll still have me." "I meant what I said the day we met," Cooper replied simply. "You'll raise that baby on my land for as long as you choose to." The first snowfall turned into a 3-day blizzard that left the ranch blanketed in 2 feet of snow. Cooper and Rachel were effectively cut off from town and neighbors alike, their world reduced to the cabin, barn, and the paths Cooper shoveled between them. Despite the close quarters, they maintained their separate sleeping arrangements, though Cooper found himself inventing reasons to spend more time in the cabin playing cards by the fire, teaching Rachel to whittle, or simply sharing stories of their lives before Montana. He learned that Rachel had grown up privileged in Denver, the only daughter of a successful cattle rancher. She'd been educated at a finishing school back east, groomed for a respectable marriage, until meeting Robert Caldwell at a social gathering the previous spring. "He was different from the other men my father approved of," she explained one evening as they sat before the fire. "Adventurous, full of dreams, he talked about the future like it was a magnificent journey we'd take together." "And you believed him," Cooper said. "It wasn't a question." Rachel nodded, absently stroking her belly, now so large she could barely reach the table when seated for meals. "Completely. When I discovered I was with child, I never doubted he'd marry me, but when I told him..." Her voice faltered. "He disappeared," Cooper finished for her. "The very next day, no note, no explanation, just gone." Rachel's eyes reflected the dancing flames. "My father was furious. Said I'd ruined myself for a fortune hunter and no respectable man would have me now." Cooper's hand tightened around the cup of coffee he held. "Your father sounds like a man more concerned with appearances than his daughter's welfare. He's a product of his time and position," Rachel said with a sigh. "Everything in his world is about reputation and standing. A daughter with an illegitimate child threatened everything he'd built. Still doesn't excuse abandoning your own flesh and blood." "No, it doesn't." Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her chair, wincing slightly. "What about your family? You mentioned a brother." Cooper nodded, deliberately changing the subject to distract her from what he suspected were increasing pains. "Jacob. He's got a small spread near Helena. 3 boys and a girl last I heard, though there might be another by now. You're not close." "We write at Christmas," Cooper said with a shrug. "He never understood why I kept drifting instead of settling down. I never understood how he could be content in one place. Suppose we're both where we belong now." Rachel smiled, but it quickly transformed into a grimace as she shifted again, both hands going to her belly. Cooper set down his coffee. "Rachel, it's nothing," she insisted, though her face had gone pale. "Just the baby moving." Cooper crossed to her side, crouching beside her chair. "Rachel, I think it might be more than that. How often have you been feeling these pains?" She bit her lip. "Every 20 minutes or so, since this morning." "Why didn't you say something?" Cooper demanded, alarmed. "Because there's nothing to be done about it," she replied practically. "The pass to town is snowed in. The midwife can't get here and we can't get there. I'll have to manage on my own." Cooper ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Rachel had come to recognize as a sign of his agitation. "I don't know the first thing about delivering babies." "Neither do I," Rachel admitted with a weak laugh. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time. We'll figure it out together." Another contraction seized her, stronger this time, causing her to gasp and clutch the arms of the chair. "We need to prepare," Cooper said decisively, standing. "What do you need?" Between contractions, Rachel directed Cooper in gathering supplies: clean linens, a basin of hot water, the sharpest knife he possessed boiled clean, and various herbs from her trunk that she claimed would help with pain and bleeding. As darkness fell outside, the contractions grew stronger and closer together. Cooper helped Rachel pace the cabin when she could walk and supported her through the increasingly intense pains when she couldn't. "Tell me about your ranch," she gasped during one particularly difficult contraction, fingers digging into Cooper's forearms as he held her upright. "What will it look like in 5 years?" Cooper recognized her need for distraction and played along, describing his plans for expansion: a larger herd, improved breeding stock, perhaps a proper house to replace the cabin. "With a proper kitchen," Rachel added, her voice strained, "and glass windows." "And a nursery," Cooper found himself saying, "for the little one." Rachel's eyes met his, surprise mingling with something deeper, something neither of them had acknowledged growing between them over the past weeks. Before she could respond, another contraction took hold, more powerful than any before. "Cooper," she gasped, "I think I need to push." What followed were the most harrowing hours of Cooper's life. Rachel labored through the night, her courage never faltering even as exhaustion and pain took their toll. Cooper remained by her side, supporting her back when she pushed, wiping her brow with cool cloths and speaking words of encouragement that felt hollow in the face of her suffering. As dawn approached, Rachel's strength began to wane. "I can't," she whispered after a particularly grueling contraction. "I can't do this anymore." Cooper took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Yes, you can. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Rachel Collins. Stronger than any man I've ridden with. You can do this." Something in his words or the intensity of his gaze seemed to reach her. With renewed determination, Rachel gathered her remaining strength for one final effort. Minutes later, the cabin filled with the indignant wail of a newborn. "A girl," Cooper announced, his voice thick with emotion as he caught the tiny, slippery infant in hands that suddenly seemed too large and rough for such a delicate task. "Rachel, you have a daughter." Working on instinct and half-remembered descriptions from his brother's letters, Cooper tied off and cut the cord, then wrapped the squalling infant in a clean cloth before placing her in Rachel's trembling arms. "She's perfect," Rachel whispered, tears streaming down her face as she counted fingers and toes. "Look what we did, Cooper." The "we" wasn't lost on Cooper, who felt an unexpected surge of emotion at being included in this miracle, despite having no biological claim to the child. After helping Rachel deliver the afterbirth and ensuring the bleeding wasn't excessive, Cooper left mother and daughter to rest while he stepped outside to clear his head. The world was transformed. Pristine white snow stretched in every direction, the rising sun painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Cooper took a deep breath of the crisp air, letting the reality of what had just occurred wash over him. Against all odds, a new life had entered the world under his roof. A tiny, perfect life that had no idea of the complicated circumstances of her arrival. When he returned to the cabin, Rachel was dozing with the infant asleep on her chest. Cooper moved quietly, stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast, overwhelmed by the strange domesticity of the scene. As he worked, Rachel stirred, her eyes finding him across the room. "She needs a name," she said softly. Cooper approached, perching carefully on the edge of the bed to gaze at the sleeping infant. "What did you have in mind?" I was thinking. "Hope, it seems fitting." "Hope Collins," Cooper tested the name. "It's perfect." Rachel hesitated, then said, "Actually, I was wondering." "What would you think of Hope Prescott Collins?" Cooper's head snapped up, his eyes meeting Rachel's. "You want to give her my name? You saved us both," Rachel said simply. "Without you, I don't know where we'd be right now. It seems right that she should carry something of you with her, even if I'm not her father," Cooper finished. Rachel nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "Cooper, when the pass is clear, Robert might come looking for me. For us, I need to know where you stand if that happens." Cooper was silent for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "I stand with you," he finally said. "Whatever you decide, if you choose to return to him, I'll wish you well. If you choose to stay." He paused. "This land, this home such as it is, will always be open to you both." "And if I choose to stay but not with you," Rachel pressed, needing clarity. "Then I'll build you your own cabin on the North Ridge," Cooper said without hesitation. "With glass windows and a proper kitchen, you'll never want for anything I can provide." Rachel studied his face. "You're an unusual man, Cooper Prescott, just trying to do what's right." He gestured to the infant. "May I hold her?" Rachel carefully transferred the sleeping bundle into Cooper's arms. The tiny weight felt impossibly light, yet somehow the most significant burden he'd ever carried. "Hello, Hope Prescott Collins," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." In that moment, looking down at the infant's peaceful face, Cooper knew his life had irrevocably changed. Whatever came next, whether Rachel stayed or went, whether she chose him or another, he would forever be connected to this child and her mother. The weeks following Hope's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and adjustments to their routine. The baby thrived despite the harsh winter conditions, growing stronger daily. Rachel recovered her strength gradually, while Cooper took on additional chores to allow her time to rest and care for the infant. December arrived with bitter cold and more snow, effectively sealing them off from the outside world until spring. Cooper continued to sleep in the barn, though Rachel had tentatively suggested he might move back to the cabin, given the extreme temperatures. "There's room enough for your bedroll by the fire," she'd offered. "It seems foolish for you to risk freezing when there's warm space here." Cooper had declined, citing propriety, though the truth was more complex. His feelings for Rachel had grown beyond simple charity or even friendship. Living in such close proximity while maintaining proper boundaries was already challenging enough. "I've weathered worse," he'd assured her. "The barn is plenty warm with the animals." Though disappointed, Rachel hadn't pressed the issue. Instead, their relationship evolved in other ways: shared responsibilities for Hope, longer conversations by the fire after she was asleep, and a deepening understanding of each other's hopes and fears. One evening in late December, as a particularly vicious blizzard howled outside, Cooper entered the cabin with an armful of firewood to find Rachel singing softly to Hope, who was fussing more than usual. "She feeling all right?" he asked, setting down the wood and removing his snow-covered coat. Rachel looked up, fatigue evident in her face. "I think she's getting teeth early. Nothing seems to soothe her." Cooper approached, holding out his arms. "Let me try. You look like you could use a rest." Gratefully, Rachel passed the squirming infant to him. To both their surprise, Hope immediately quieted, her wide eyes fixing on Cooper's face with apparent fascination. "She knows her protector," Rachel said softly. Cooper settled into the rocking chair, cradling Hope against his chest. The infant's tiny hand wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "Come spring, we should consider making some changes to the ranch." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "What kind of changes?" "If you're planning to stay," he continued carefully, "the cabin's too small for the three of us. I thought I might build a proper house. 2 stories with separate bedrooms and that kitchen you wanted." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant undertaking for a maybe." "Is it a maybe?" Cooper asked, meeting her gaze directly. "I need to know your intentions, Rachel. Not to pressure you, but to plan. Spring will be here before we know it, and with it, the possibility of Caldwell or your father returning." Rachel sighed, sinking onto the edge of the bed. I've been avoiding thinking about it. Here, cut off from everything, it's been easy to pretend the outside world doesn't exist. But it does, Cooper said gently, and decisions will need to be made. What if I don't know what I want yet? Then say that, but don't leave me guessing. Rachel was silent for a long moment, her eyes on her daughter in Cooper's arms. I know I don't want to return to my parents' home to live under my father's control, and I know, she hesitated. I know I feel safe here with you. Beyond that, I'm still uncertain. Cooper nodded, accepting her honesty if not entirely satisfied by it. Then we plan as if you're staying, at least for now. If circumstances change, we'll adapt. You do all that, build a house, expand the ranch knowing I might leave. I'd build the house anyway, Cooper said with a shrug. Been meaning to for years. Having you and Hope here just gives me more reason to get on with it. Rachel studied him with an unreadable expression. You're unlike any man I've ever known, Cooper Prescott. Cooper looked down at Hope, who had fallen asleep against his chest. I'm just a man trying to do right by the people in my care. It's more than that, Rachel insisted. You could have left me by that broken wagon. You could have taken me to town and washed your hands of my problems. Instead, you've given us a home, asked for nothing in return, and now you're planning a future that accommodates us without any guarantee we'll be part of it. Cooper was silent for a moment. When I bought this land, he finally said, I had a vision of what it could become. Not just a profitable ranch, but a legacy, something that would outlast me. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I never imagined that legacy might include a family, but now that the possibility exists, I find I want it more than I've wanted anything. Rachel's breath caught Cooper. I'm not proposing, he clarified quickly. Not yet. You need time to sort through your feelings about Caldwell and everything that's happened. I respect that, but I want you to know where I stand. Before Rachel could respond, a pounding at the door startled them both. Cooper carefully transferred the sleeping Hope back to Rachel's arms before reaching for his revolver. Who would be out in this weather? Rachel whispered, clutching the baby protectively. Cooper moved to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. Can't see clearly, he murmured, but there are two riders. The pounding came again, more insistent. Prescott? A voice called through the howling wind. Open up, sheriff's business. Cooper exchanged a glance with Rachel, whose face had gone pale. Checking that his revolver was loaded, Cooper approached the door and opened it just enough to see outside. Standing on his porch, covered in snow, were Sheriff Dawson from Whitetail Creek and a well-dressed man Cooper didn't recognize. Sheriff, Cooper acknowledged, not opening the door further. What brings you out in this storm? Got a complaint about a kidnapped woman, Dawson replied gruffly. Tom Wilson claims you're holding his daughter against her will. The man beside the sheriff stepped forward. I'm Robert Caldwell. I've come for my fiancé and child. Cooper's jaw tightened. There's no one here against their will. As for fiancé, that's news to the lady in question. Let me see her, Caldwell demanded. Let me explain. Cooper glanced back at Rachel, who had risen to her feet, hope still cradled in her arms. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Reluctantly, Cooper opened the door wider, allowing the two men to enter. They stomped snow from their boots, bringing a blast of cold air that made Hope stir and whimper. Caldwell stopped short at the sight of Rachel and the infant. Rachel, he breathed. Thank God you're alive. Your father's been frantic. Rachel's expression remained guarded. My father cast me out the moment he learned I was with child. His concern now comes rather late. There was a misunderstanding, Caldwell insisted, taking a step toward her. Cooper subtly shifted to remain between them. I never abandoned you. I went to stake a claim in the silver mines near Silver City. I sent letters explaining everything. Letters I never received, Rachel replied skeptically. I swear it, Caldwell said earnestly. When I returned to Denver and learned what had happened, that your father had sent you away, I was devastated. I've been searching for months. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. Miss Collins, is what your father claims true? Are you being held here against your will? Rachel straightened, her chin lifting defiantly. Absolutely not. Mr. Prescott saved my life when my wagon broke down. He's provided shelter and protection through my confinement and the birth of my daughter. I'm here by choice. The sheriff nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, that settles the kidnapping charge. The rest is a private matter. He turned to Caldwell. "You found her as promised. What happens next is between you folks." Caldwell ignored the sheriff, his attention fixed on Rachel and the baby. "She's beautiful," he said softly. "May I?" Rachel hesitated, then stepped forward, allowing Caldwell to see his daughter clearly for the first time. Hope had awakened, her dark eyes so like her mother's regarding the stranger curiously. "She has your chin," Rachel observed, her voice neutral. "And your eyes," Caldwell replied, his own suspiciously bright. "Rachel, please, let me make this right. I have the claim papers properly filed. The assay shows the mine will be profitable. We can be married immediately. Give our daughter my name." Cooper watched the exchange silently, his heart like lead in his chest. This was the moment he'd been dreading, the moment Rachel would have to choose between the father of her child and the man who had taken them in. "Robert," Rachel said carefully, "much has changed since Denver. I'm not the same woman who fell in love with your promises." "I understand," Caldwell said quickly. "You've been through a terrible ordeal, but I'm here now. I can take care of you both, provide everything you need." Rachel glanced at Cooper, a silent communication passing between them. "I already have everything I need," she said softly. Caldwell followed her gaze, comprehension dawning. "You and Prescott, is that how it is?" "It's not what you're thinking," Cooper interjected. "I've respected Miss Collins's position and reputation. My only interest has been her welfare and the child's." "But you want more," Caldwell challenged, an edge entering his voice. Cooper met his gaze steadily. "What I want is irrelevant. This is Rachel's decision." All eyes turned to Rachel, who stood straighter despite the visible fatigue of new motherhood. "I need time," she finally said. "This is too sudden, too important a decision to make in haste." "Time," Caldwell repeated incredulously. "Rachel, I've traveled hundreds of miles in winter to find you." "Our daughter needs a father, a proper home." "She has both," Rachel interrupted, her voice firm. "Cooper has been more of a father to Hope in her few weeks of life than you had the opportunity to be. As for a proper home, we have that too." Cooper felt a surge of emotion at her words, though he kept his expression neutral. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat again. "Night's falling fast, and that storm's getting worse. Nobody's traveling back to town tonight. I suggest you all get some rest and continue this discussion in the morning." "The sheriff's right," Cooper said. "You're welcome to stay in the barn, gentlemen. It's warm enough with the animals, and there's fresh hay for bedding." Caldwell looked as if he might protest, but the howling wind outside made the decision for him. "Fine, but this isn't over, Prescott." After the men had gone to the barn, Rachel sank into the rocking chair, Hope fussing against her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Cooper asked, kneeling beside her. "I don't know," she admitted. "Seeing him again, it stirred up feelings I thought were resolved." Cooper nodded, trying to mask the pain her words caused. "That's understandable. He is Hope's father." "Yes," Rachel agreed softly, "but biology isn't everything. Robert talks of providing for us, but where was he when I needed him most? When I was cast out by my family, traveling alone across the territory, giving birth in a snowstorm. He says he tried to find you." "Perhaps he did," Rachel conceded. "But intentions aren't enough, Cooper. Actions matter more. And your actions have shown me what kind of man truly deserves to be called a father." Hope began to cry in earnest then, her tiny face scrunching with hunger. Rachel adjusted her dress to feed the infant, a process that had become natural and unself-conscious between them over the weeks. "What will you tell him tomorrow?" Cooper asked, moving to stoke the fire. Rachel sighed. "I honestly don't know. Part of me feels I should give Robert a chance for Hope's sake. Another part wants to stay," Cooper finished when she trailed off. Rachel met his gaze over their daughter's head. "Yes, but not out of gratitude or necessity, because something has grown between us, Cooper, something I wasn't looking for but can't ignore." Cooper's heart quickened. "Rachel, no," she interrupted gently. "Don't say anything now. We both need to think clearly. There's too much at stake for impulse decisions." Cooper nodded, respecting her wisdom even as his emotions urged him to press his case. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough." That night, as Cooper lay awake in the barn, painfully aware of Caldwell and the sheriff sleeping nearby, he confronted the possibility of losing Rachel and Hope. The thought left a hollow ache in his chest that no amount of reasoning could diminish. He had fallen in love with them both, gradually and then suddenly, like a creek that rises imperceptibly until it overflows its banks. The realization had been building for weeks, but facing the prospect of their departure made it impossible to deny any longer. Morning arrived with clearing skies and bitter cold. Cooper rose before the others, tending to the livestock and preparing coffee before his guests stirred. When Rachel emerged from the cabin with Hope bundled against the chill, her face was serene but determined. "I've made my decision," she told Cooper quietly as they stood watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in gold and pink. Before she could continue, the barn door opened, and Caldwell emerged, followed by the sheriff. The former had clearly slept poorly, his expensive clothes rumpled, his expression anxious. "Rachel," he called, striding toward them. "I hope you've had time to consider my proposal," Rachel nodded, shifting Hope in her arms. "I have, Robert. I appreciate you coming all this way, and I believe you when you say you tried to find us." Caldwell's face brightened with hope. "Then you'll return with me. We can be married in Whitetail Creek today." "No," Rachel said simply. "I won't be returning with you." Caldwell's expression froze. "What?" "Rachel, be reasonable. What future can you possibly have here?" "A good one," Rachel replied with quiet confidence. "With a man who has proven his character and commitment not through words but through actions." Caldwell's gaze darted between Rachel and Cooper, comprehension and anger dawning simultaneously. "You can't be serious. You choose a rancher you barely know over your daughter's father, over the life I can provide." "I know Cooper better than I ever knew you," Rachel countered. "I've seen him at his worst and his best. I know his character, his heart. As for providing, he's given us everything we truly need: safety, respect, and a home built on more than material promises." Cooper stood silent, barely daring to believe what he was hearing. Caldwell turned to him, anger evident in his posture. "You've poisoned her against me, taken advantage of her vulnerable state." "That's enough," Sheriff Dawson interrupted, stepping forward. "The lady's made her choice, Caldwell. In my experience, trying to force a woman's hand only ends badly for all concerned." "She's not thinking clearly," Caldwell insisted. "Rachel, what about our daughter? Don't you want her to have her father's name, his protection?" "Hope already has a name," Rachel said softly. "Hope Prescott Collins, and as for protection, she has that in abundance right here." The significance of the middle name wasn't lost on Caldwell, whose face flushed with anger and humiliation. "This isn't over. I have rights. You have the right to be part of Hope's life," Rachel acknowledged. "I won't deny you that, but it will be on terms that respect my decision and Cooper's place in our lives." For a moment, it seemed Caldwell might continue to argue, but something in Rachel's firm stance, or perhaps the subtle shift of Cooper's hand toward his revolver, convinced him otherwise. "Fine," he said curtly, "but this discussion isn't finished. I'll be back in the spring." He turned to the sheriff. "I'm ready to return to town now." Sheriff Dawson looked between the three adults, then nodded. "Miss Collins, you're certain this is your free choice?" "Absolutely certain," Rachel confirmed. "Then we'll be on our way. The pass should be clear enough with the storm past." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Madam, Prescott." They watched in silence as the two men mounted their horses and rode away, Caldwell's rigid back radiating wounded pride and thwarted intentions. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Cooper turn to Rachel. "Did you mean it?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Rachel met his gaze, her eyes clear and certain. "Every word. If you'll have us, Cooper, this is where Hope and I belong." Cooper's hand reached up to cup her cheek, his calloused palm gentle against her skin. "I've wanted to do this for weeks," he murmured, then leaned down to kiss her. The kiss was tender at first, tentative with the newness of acknowledged feelings, then deepening as months of unspoken desire found expression. Hope squirmed between them, breaking the moment with a tiny sound of protest. Cooper laughed, pulling back slightly but keeping one arm around Rachel's shoulders. "Sorry, little one, not used to sharing your mother yet." Rachel smiled up at him, her free hand finding his. "She'll learn, we all will." "Rachel," Cooper said seriously, "I'm not a wealthy man. This ranch is still more promise than profit. I can't offer you the life Caldwell might have." "I don't want that life," Rachel replied simply. "I want this one with you, building something real together, something that will last." Cooper's heart swelled with a happiness he'd never imagined possible. "Then let's begin today, starting with that house I promised you." As winter gradually released its grip on the land, Cooper and Rachel settled into a new rhythm of life together. Though Cooper initially insisted on maintaining separate sleeping arrangements until things were proper, Rachel eventually persuaded him that frontier propriety could accommodate some flexibility given their unique circumstances. With the spring thaw came renewed energy and purpose. Cooper began construction on the main house, a 2-story structure with proper glass windows, a spacious kitchen, and 3 bedrooms for now. As he put it with a meaningful glance at Rachel that made her blush, true to his word, Caldwell returned when the mountain passes cleared. This time, however, his approach was more measured. He had accepted, if not entirely embraced, Rachel's decision and focused instead on establishing a relationship with his daughter. After several tense visits, a compromise was reached. Caldwell would have visitation rights, seeing Hope several times a year, but Rachel and Cooper would raise her as their own. On a perfect June day, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the mountains standing sentinel against a cloudless sky, Cooper and Rachel were married beneath the old oak tree near the creek. The ceremony was small Sheriff Dawson officiated, and a few neighbors from surrounding ranches attended, along with Rachel's mother, who had defied her husband to reconcile with her daughter. Hope, now 7 months old and determined to crawl everywhere, watched the proceedings from the arms of Mrs. Wilson, who wept openly at the sight of her daughter in a simple white dress, her hair adorned with wildflowers. "I never thought I'd see this day," she confessed to Cooper afterward. "When Rachel left Denver, I feared the worst. Thank you for giving them both a home." Cooper, uncharacteristically formal in a new suit, nodded respectfully. "Madam, they gave me far more than I gave them. They made this place a home." As the golden light of late afternoon bathed the celebration, Cooper found Rachel at the edge of the gathering, Hope sleeping against her shoulder. "Mrs. Prescott," he said, savoring the words. Happy Rachel's smile was answer enough, but she spoke anyway, happier than I ever thought possible and grateful. "For what?" "For a broken wagon wheel," she said softly, "for a snowstorm that kept us isolated. For every circumstance that led me to you." Cooper smiled, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter. "I once thought this land was my legacy. Now I know it's just the beginning." Together they watched the sun begin its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across what was now truly their land, a place where a broken wagon had led to a mended life, where a woman cast out had found her way home, and where a child would grow knowing she was wanted, protected, and loved. 5 years later, the sound of childish laughter echoed across the ranch yard as Cooper dismounted, weary from a long day working the north pasture. The Prescott Ranch had flourished in the years since he and Rachel had married, expanding to over 500 acres with a respectable herd of cattle and a reputation for fine horses that brought buyers from as far as Denver. "Papa." Hope called, racing toward him with reckless abandon, her dark braids flying behind her. At 5, she was a perfect blend of Rachel's beauty and Caldwell's height, but her spirit was purely her own, fearless, kind, and perpetually curious. "There's my girl," Cooper said, swinging her into his arms. "Have you been helping your mama today?" "I helped with the bread," Hope announced proudly. "And I read a whole page all by myself." "Is that so? You'll be running the ranch accounts before I know it." Cooper set her down as Rachel appeared in the doorway of their home, a sturdy 2-story structure that had replaced the original cabin 3 years prior. "And your brother?" Cooper asked, scanning the yard. "Where's that rascal hiding?" "Taking his nap," Rachel replied, descending the porch steps to greet her husband with a kiss. "Finally. That child fights sleep like it's his mortal enemy," Cooper laughed, wrapping an arm around his wife's waist. 3-year-old James Cooper Prescott was indeed a force of nature, with his father's stubborn determination and his mother's quick mind. "Dinner's almost ready," Rachel said, leading them toward the house. "Hope, go wash up, please." As their daughter scampered ahead, Cooper pulled Rachel close for a proper greeting away from young eyes. "Hello, wife," he murmured against her lips. "Hello, husband," she replied, her smile as warm as it had been on their wedding day. Productive day? Very. The north pasture fence is finished, and I spoke with Johnson about those Hereford bulls. If all goes well, we'll have the finest breeding stock in the territory by next spring. Rachel nodded, her hand finding his as they walked toward the house. Caldwell's letter arrived today. He'll be visiting next month, staying in town as usual. Cooper's expression remained neutral. Over the years, he'd developed a cordial if not warm relationship with Hope's biological father, who had indeed made his fortune in silver mining. Twice-yearly visits had become routine, with Caldwell respecting the boundaries Cooper and Rachel had established while maintaining a consistent presence in his daughter's life. "Hope will be pleased," Cooper said. "She enjoyed the books he sent for her birthday." "She did," Rachel agreed. "Though she told me quite seriously that while Mr. Caldwell gives nice presents, you're her real papa because you teach her important things like riding and fishing." Cooper's heart swelled with quiet pride. Though he'd never sought to replace Caldwell in Hope's life, the bond between them had grown naturally and strong. She was, in every way that mattered, his daughter. As they entered the house warm with the scent of baking bread and stew, Cooper was struck, as he often was, by how completely his life had transformed. From a solitary existence focused solely on building a ranch, he had somehow acquired a family that filled every corner of his world with purpose and joy. Later that evening, with both children finally asleep, Cooper joined Rachel on the front porch. The habit had begun during her pregnancy with James and continued as their favorite way to end each day, a few quiet moments together watching the stars emerge over their land. "I had a letter from the land office today," Cooper said, settling beside her on the bench he'd built their first year of marriage. "The Thornton place to the west is going up for sale. 300 acres, good water rights." Rachel turned to him, eyebrows raised. "You're thinking of buying?" Cooper nodded. "If we can get the right price, it would give us better access to the summer grazing lands, room to expand the herd. Can we afford it, with the profits from this year's cattle drive, and if we're careful with expenses until next spring?" Cooper calculated. "It would be tight but doable." Rachel was quiet for a moment, considering. "Do it," she finally said. "Your instincts about land have been right so far. Besides, with the way Hope rides already, she'll need her own spread one day." Cooper chuckled. "She's 5, Rachel. And already has more determination than most grown men I've known," Rachel countered with a smile. "James, too. They'll both need room to grow their dreams someday." Cooper took her hand, marveling at how well she understood him. Building a legacy for their children had become his driving purpose, ensuring they would have choices and opportunities he'd never had. "Speaking of the future," Rachel said carefully, "there's something we should discuss." Cooper turned to her, recognizing the particular tone. "What is it?" Rachel took his hand, placing it gently on her stomach with a smile that held both joy and trepidation. "It seems our family isn't quite complete yet." For a moment, Cooper stared at her in wonder, then broke into a broad grin. "Really? When?" "Early spring, I think. Are you happy?" In answer, Cooper pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said when they finally parted, "though I may need to add another bedroom to the house." Rachel laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Or 2. My mother always said blessings come in pairs." They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened into full night, the first stars appearing overhead. Cooper's mind wandered back to that day 5 years ago when he'd found Rachel beside her broken wagon, alone and afraid but determined to forge a path forward. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel asked, noting his pensive expression. "About how differently things might have turned out," he admitted. "If I'd taken another trail that day, if you'd accepted your father's demands or Caldwell's proposal." Rachel squeezed his hand. "But you didn't and I didn't. We made our choices, Cooper, the right ones." Cooper nodded, his gaze taking in the ranch that had grown from a solitary cabin to a thriving enterprise, the home they'd built together, and the woman who had transformed his vision of the future. "The best choice I ever made," he said softly, "was telling a stubborn, pregnant stranger she could raise her baby on my land." Rachel smiled, the same smile that had captivated him from the beginning, resilient, hopeful, and true. "And the best choice I ever made was believing you." As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch, planning their expanding future on the land that had brought them together, a future built on choices made in courage, challenges overcome together, and a love that had begun with an act of simple human decency and grown into something neither could have imagined that fateful day on the trail to Whitetail Creek.